Alright, hello everyone, welcome to the stream. So, just to be super clear and just to start things out, I'm not going to be addressing chat a ton during this. The point of this is to get my opinion out and basically just have it in one convenient place. I'm going to be uploading this to YouTube afterwards. I'm kind of tired of typing the same shit out in Discord over and over again. So I'm just going to address everything in here, in this video, in this like Twitch stream, whatever, wherever you happen to find this. And if I see anyone in my Discord kind of spouting their opinions on this, I'm going to point them to this video, and if they can't address the points I have in the video, then I'm going to ask them to stop talking about it, or come on voice chat and have a voice discussion, one of the two things, alright? So that's the purpose of this. I'm only doing this because I keep seeing the same shit repeated in my Discord, the same tired arguments, the same weird kind of excuses and that kind of thing, so I'm just going to address it all here. So obviously today I'm going to be talking about the killing of George Floyd in America. I've just explained the reason I'm doing this, but I think to start off with, I wanted to talk about kind of how my opinions on the matter has changed over time and that kind of thing, which is why I have the death of Mark Duggan up at the minute. So, back in 2011, a much younger Devin, a much naiver Devin, was over at someone's house in Leicester, which is fairly far away from London. I was visiting someone I knew from a festival, staying at her house for the night because the riots had just kicked off. None of this, obviously, I could have seen coming. I just kind of went over there and was planning to come back on the day, but couldn't and then my mom called and was like, hey, you know, I'm a little afraid, like, maybe don't come back to London tonight. Shit's pretty crazy. It's kind of catching on fire and whatnot. So, what caused those riots? Why were the people rioting? And essentially, what was the whole situation for people who aren't aware? I'm going to explain it now. So, Mark Duggan was a 29-year-old man who was shot and killed in Tottenham, which is distressingly close to where I live, by the way, which is why actually I couldn't come home, because it was particularly bad in some of the areas that I was really near. Basically, he was shot and killed by police. He was unarmed. The police claimed he was armed. That's pretty much all it was. It was a police shooting for someone. I don't even know what he'd actually been charged of or called up on or whatever. They believed he was armed at the time they shot him. After they shot him, they discovered that actually he wasn't armed. So naturally, this caused a whole bunch of rioting, and people were very distrustful of the police, and all of that kind of thing happened around this time. So first things first, at the time, my opinion was very much like a lot of the people that I'm seeing right now. I didn't really have much of an opinion on the guy getting shot. I think I heard that he was a drug dealer. It turns out, as I read through this, that was something that was basically said by the police, but it wasn't ever confirmed by anyone. I don't know if there's any proof of this. He has some minor charges. I think that he has some minor marijuana charges. Like, who gives a fuck, really? And I think there was one other thing about handling stolen goods. So, I mean, but either way, none of this is relevant. Regardless of the fact, at the time, I kind of found it ridiculous people were rioting, and I was very much of the opinion that rioting is just too destructive. It's, you know, there's no reason, to riot, even if you have issues with the police. Why can't you peacefully protest? You know, why can't you just stay quiet and kind of, just be on the wayside? If that had happened, this story, I might not have even known about. I might not have ever heard that somebody was shot by police if people didn't riot. I may have had no idea that this had ever happened, alright? So that's the first thing to look at. Secondly, after enough time, they obviously, in riots, some pretty crazy shit happens, right? There's no denying that. Buildings get set on fire, people get hurt. These are just consequences of rioting, without a shadow of a doubt. A couple local businesses got destroyed, and I was of the opinion that, hey, why don't people just be out there and just, defend their local businesses? I mean, this seems really bad. I think the police should roll in and use rubber bullets, non-lethal methods to dissuade the people from rioting. I think this is really bad. Why are they fucking up their own town? That seems pretty fucked up. And then I had to reconsider my thoughts, because roughly, I don't know, 4 hours down the line, I think people actually did start to defend their stores, and guess who it fucking was? It was the EDL. And at that point, I was like, wow, maybe I'm on the wrong side of history on this one. You know, it was literally that skit from the Mitchell and Webb look, where you've got the Nazis in the trenches, and then they realise they have skulls on their helmets, and then one of them says to the other, are we the baddies? And I kind of had a bit of that moment, you know. It was a really strange, uncomfortable, kind of realisation almost. And so I looked more and more into it. So I researched more about Mark Duggan, found out he was just shot dead, he wasn't armed. It just seemed completely unjustified. It made no sense. But the point I'm making overall here is that rioting, simply put, is just a natural consequence of unjust actions. It is incredibly rare. I can't point to a single example. I'm sure there are a couple, but the vast majority of riots, the vast majority of riots are caused by some incredibly unjust thing that completely destabilizes people's trust in authority. Simply put, that is why riots happen. They are a natural consequence of certain material conditions, as someone called Varsh put it, who's a guy on YouTube I watch. Riots are going to happen if you do shit like this. Simply put, happy people don't riot. You're never going to see like a middle class kind of like random white person who isn't particularly interested in race relations or anything like that, who isn't interested in police brutality. You're never going to see that person rioting because they have no reason to. It's the same reason you're not going to see them looting, because they have everything they want. They're never gonna engage in those kinds of activities because there's just no reason to, right? Secondly, rioting and looting is obviously not good. I'm not claiming here that those things are good actions. Even the people who riot and loot, I promise you, wouldn't want that as the standard for a society they live in. They're rioting and looting because of a certain thing that is happening, because of a certain reason they're unhappy, right? Regardless of your opinion on the looters and rioters, it doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant here. Whether you think they're good or bad or whatever the fuck, doesn't matter. Rioting is going to happen when black people get executed in the streets of America, when black people are shot and they're completely unarmed. I mean, honestly, I think if this was a white guy in the UK and he got shot dead, I wouldn't be that surprised if a riot happened anyway, because obviously it's a much less usual situation over here. But just to show, really quickly, just to show you how similar I think these two were, I have some footage of the riots that we can just watch now real quick. So this is from 2011 from Tottenham.
The sheer ferocity of this disorder took many by surprise. No one, we're told, could have predicted this level of violence. But in truth, age-old tensions between sections of this community and the police are still a significant issue. All that was needed was a spark to ignite that anger. It came last Thursday night when police shot dead a local man. And now even community leaders, while condemning Saturday night's violence, point to the continuing unanswered questions about that fatal shooting as a catalyst for the disorder.
What we see behind us is very painful. The heart of our community has been ripped out, and some folks have come in to Tottenham to escalate the situation. But what we must recognize is the people that came here, peaceful protesters saying, give us answers for what has happened 2 days ago. They didn't get those answers.
The answers they want relate to the death of this man, 29-year-old Mark Duggan, shot by police on Thursday evening in an anti-firearms operation near Tottenham Hale Tube Station. Amid mounting tension, more than 100 people, including family and friends, marched on Saturday from the Broadwater Farm estate to Tottenham.
So yeah, pretty much very similar situation. The difference being is that, I guess, people being executed in the streets by police is less common in the UK. I'm not saying we're perfect, not even close. I haven't looked into a ton of the stats on police brutality, but I'm sure there are for the UK. But the point is that it's a very similar situation, right? So basically, let's talk about this from a slightly different perspective, right? I'm from the UK. We don't see this kind of shit very often. That was an abnormal situation. It happened 9 years ago. The one before that, because there was another, I believe it was an unjust police killing, but I'm not 100% sure. I know there were riots back in like the 70s. It was Tottenham again. So it's not totally unheard of, but definitely not super common, right? So let's consider this from a slightly different perspective. You're a black person in America. Black people in America are killed by police at a disproportionate rate compared to every other race in America. Now, regardless of your opinion on black people and crime statistics and all that kind of stuff, the point is that black people, without a shadow of a doubt, like I said, we've seen it on. There's a couple videos and whatnot of various different killings and police body cams and stuff like that. We know statistically that black people are killed more in America, and they're also discriminated against in like in a systematic way. They get longer sentencing for the same crimes. They have a much higher chance to be arrested and also incriminated for marijuana charges. And I think it's something like 3 times as likely than white people, despite doing it at the same rate. So we know there's racial imbalance in America. This is just a thing that's been studied. You can go look up any number of studies in regards to this. So think about this, right? You're a black person in America. You've just seen a 9-minute video of another black person being knelt on by a police officer, basically struggling to breathe, telling the police officer he can't breathe, not resisting arrest whatsoever, with 2 or 3 other police watching, and nothing's being done. There's nothing anyone can do about it. This person is just dying right in front of your eyes. There is fuck all anyone can do about it, right? Then you look back at all the previous times this has happened, all the peaceful protests, and 0 has changed. Literally 0. You've just seen it again in 2020, right in front of your fucking eyes. They could have picked him up, he was on the floor, they could have put some cuffs on him, his arms were behind his back, they could have chucked him into a police car. I don't know about you guys, but I've personally never seen anyone escape a police car, so I don't think you could really claim that they were worried he might escape or something. I think this is a pretty cut and dry situation. I think it's very clear that this is some crazy fucking, I don't know, like power trip, I guess, for the cop or something along those lines. It's one of the most unjust killings. It's one of the most perfect videos, in a sense, that you could possibly find in regards to this. And then you look back and you say, oh, wow, peaceful protests seem to achieve nothing. Body cam footage isn't being released, even if they're being implemented. Like, it's a really tough situation. So, what do? You go out into the street and you start protesting. All of a sudden, the police violence starts increasing. I don't know how many you guys have seen, but from my point of view, I've seen an unreal number of police brutality videos during these whole protests. Now, I understand both sides have kind of escalated over time. I understand that pretty much since this happened, people started rioting. But once again, we have to recognize that rioting is just a natural consequence to things like this. It's happened in the past, it will happen again. This is just something you can expect people to do. There are no 2 ways about it. Regardless of what you think about the rioting in general, it's just a thing that's going to happen. That's just a straight fact. There is no denying that whatsoever. So then imagine that as people are protesting, you see shit like this. This was a video that was sent in from one of the people who watches me. In fact, one of my mods, actually.
These protesters are unarmed, and the police are shooting their little
I'll skip ahead a bit
bullets at them.
because I don't think much happens for a bit.
Coming out with
But you can see these people are protesting. They're just in the streets, arms up, with their signs, bike, whatever. Usual stuff. Pretty standard protesty type stuff, right?
Leave them alone!
She gets shot by a rubber bullet, completely unprovoked. No way that could have been provoked. Police was just standing there. I kind of love the balls on this cop, to be honest. He's just chilling there. He's like, you know what? I haven't seen any action. I've been standing around in this heat for 3-4 hours. This is some bullshit. I wasn't trained for this. I was trained to fire my rifle at people, okay? Fuck it. That person looked at me funny, I guess. You know, the point is that when this kind of shit happens, and this shit is going to happen when police start responding to riots, there's going to be brutality on both sides. You can pretty much expect, it's almost unimaginable that this shit wouldn't escalate. Yeah, no shit. People aren't gonna start, just assaulting police when there's a risk of this stuff happening, but they have this massive level of just completely unchanneled rage. They're gonna take it out on something. And honestly, if people start rioting and destroying personal property, or let's say, I think there's a kind of tier list of kind of good. There's a tier list of good targets, right, when it comes to rioting. You've got, at the very top, you've got, police stations and shit. At the very bottom, you have, people's houses, right? Obviously, you don't want to be destroying people's houses. I think that's probably a bad thing. If you destroy police stations, I think that's very direct, on-point messaging, right? So there's different tiers and stuff. But the point is that if this is the risk you face when going to police stations, that kind of thing, and you have all this rage and you need to express yourself in some way, it makes sense that people are going to riot. It's just it's pretty undeniable, right? So to all the people that have been pointing out all the egregious things the rioters have been doing, the police have been doing it too. There's not really like a good sides to this, right? There's definitely irresponsible people on both sides making errors, but at least with the rioters, they're just civilians making, just doing what civilians do in these kind of circumstances. The people in power, the people like police, should be held to a much higher standard, in my opinion. There is no way that you could look at some looters or whatever breaking into a Target, going and taking a TV and leaving and saying, well, that's really shit, they shouldn't be robbing or whatever, and then look at and hold them to the same standard as these police that have come in to try and control the situation, right? That seems like an absolutely absurd dichotomy to draw. It just doesn't make any sense as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, needless to say, there's been misconduct on both sides. I don't know if you guys have seen actually, but I think my favorite one was I saw on Twitter, there was a little girl, like a 10-year-old or something, who'd been maced by police. So there's absolutely been misconduct on both sides, but I think we have to look at this from like a sociological perspective. And I think we have to acknowledge that, like I said earlier, the riots they're just going to happen. There's no getting around it. Whereas when it comes to things like police brutality, there should be checks and balances in place to make sure this can't happen. There shouldn't be so much lenience to officers that they can literally murder someone in the street, like execute someone in the street and get away with third-degree murder, or like it was manslaughter. It was like basically the charge that the officer got is very much like, oh well, this happened by accident. So I think that's pretty much everything I want to say in regards to that. I think it's interesting. The whole situation is very interesting, obviously, but I think it's interesting to go over different people's responses and go over some of the things that have been happening, right? The first thing I want to talk about in the Minneapolis riots is probably the level of kind of fascism, almost, that it seems to be descending into. This is one of my favorite videos because this is a CNN reporter who was just reporting on site.
Okay. Do you mind telling me why?
And he got arrested. There was nothing.
Why am I under arrest, sir?
There's nothing he was doing wrong. They don't seem to tell him why he's under arrest. They're not communicating with him at all. They're just arresting. They're just shutting down journalism. That's like stage one of a fascist kind of. That's stage one of like fascism, pretty much. You have shit like this happening. You have a tweet from our good buddy Trump. I'm sure everyone has seen this at this point, but when your president is tweeting out things like this, there's a very real problem in your country, without a shadow of a doubt. I don't think that anybody could look at this and say this is a good thing to tweet out. Even if you don't think that, even if you assume that he isn't telling people to go out and shoot looters, even if you assume that he's just saying that, well, if people loot, people are going to get shot. Even if you assume that, you have to accept that this is one of the most irresponsible things you could possibly say from the point of view of the president. These thugs are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let it happen. Just spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military is with him all the way. Any difficulty and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you. That's an outrageous tweet. That's like such a. I don't think you could write a satire. I don't think you could satirize this in any way more extreme than it already is. That's such an extreme sentiment to put out. It's such a like ridiculous thing to say that I don't think you could write a comedy sketch that would be more on point than what this already says. This is absolutely absurd, right? I don't think anyone's going to deny it. I don't think anyone's defending Trump. Well, I mean, there are definitely some people defending Trump, but I don't think the majority of people are going to defend this tweet, right? But regardless, the rioters have a point. They're kind of going out into the streets and, dispelling all this rage, kind of trying to get their point across in pretty much the only way they have to now. The only way they can at this point. If they peacefully protest, nothing's going to change. It might not even get particularly picked up on media outlets. If they riot, at least people are going to listen. At least they know the president's going to have to respond, stuff like that, right? And simply put, this is inexcusable. There is no reason to give almost carte blanche, to give like a reason for the military to start shooting people, especially after you've started out rolling out the National Guard to Minneapolis, right? It's pretty absurd. You're endangering lives by saying things like this. There are people that are going to take this literally and start killing people. I can't see how this wouldn't happen. I know people have already died in these riots, so I think it's more like shop owners defending their stores and things like that. But speaking of that, let's get to this whole like small businesses versus big businesses thing. I want to say real quick that I support the rioters and I support the fact that they're rioting because, simply put, they've got no other option at this point, right? They have pretty much... There's no point in peacefully protesting. They have to do something to make their voice heard, right? Going after small businesses, probably not a good thing. There are a lot of good people that have worked hard over time to get a business up to the point where they can support themselves off it. Doing a lot of damage to those kind of people probably don't help your cause. Also, optically, riots are just pretty bad, right? There's like not really, I don't think there's any, like a lot of people that disliked you already are going to dislike you even more after this. Having said all that, I think the riots are completely understandable. If you, like I said earlier, if you're getting executed in the street by state-sanctioned, state-sanctioned organizations, then I think rioting is like basically one of the only ways you can get your point across. I mean, what do you do if you peacefully protest? Exactly, just vote instead has just been mocked because, like, at the end of the day, none of this shit's going to change, at least not too soon. And if people, if you're in a class of people that are literally being executed, there's not really much you can do about it, right? The one thing that I've seen people do as well is to separate out the rioters and looters, or the protesters and looters. I think the best way to look at this is this, okay? If you're in a class of people that have been systematically oppressed and are less wealthy as a result of that, as in you've been brought over to America on slave ships, and, everyone else around you has gained massive wealth and generational wealth over that time. You were oppressed, you're in a disadvantaged position. Suddenly, your people are starting to get executed in the street by police. Obviously, it's been happening throughout the whole time. A bunch of people go out and start breaking into stores, and you see an opportunity to go and get some luxury goods that you wouldn't have otherwise, that you can't afford because of the fact you've been oppressed. I think it's very understandable that people would loot in that situation. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like looting is a quote-unquote good thing, but at the same time, I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that I wouldn't do the same thing in that situation. I don't think it makes that much sense to focus hardcore on the looters and rioters instead of the police killing in this situation, instead of the social conditions that lead to these exact results, right? I mean, that's the impression you get from the mainstream media, but people... live streaming from the ground share a whole nother story. I mean, look, the media are always going to focus on the most violent actions, without, obviously, because it just makes good news, simply. I'm sure that the vast majority of people are peacefully protesting, but I don't think it matters. I think that you can defend the riots, and I think you can defend the violent actions as well. Because, like I said, simply put, once you shut down all peaceful protests, once you get to the point where you're executing people in the street, literally executing people in the street, I don't think it makes much sense to try and, tackle it peacefully. I don't think you're going to get any results from it. I'm not saying the riots are going to, I'm not saying the riots are going to necessarily lead to the best things in the world either, but I just think it's incredibly understandable. I don't think there's any two ways about that, right? I don't think you can defend the mainstream media. It's disgusting, the coverage. I'm not defending them. I'm just saying that it's just to be expected, right? In the same way that, you would expect riots to happen when individuals get shot in the streets, when individuals get choked out in the streets. In the same way that that's to be expected, you expect the same thing from the media. I'm not saying you're defending them. Oh, okay, fair enough. Well, anyway. So just to summarize real quick. Basically, looting and rioting is pretty bad optically. It's not a good thing for society. I don't think anyone would ever defend that. But at the same time, there's no, it's going to happen. But yeah, the point is that rioting and looting is going to happen under certain social conditions. That's just undeniable. There's no two ways about it. It's going to happen, all right? So, having said everything, basically, I think that people should 100% not be focused on the rioting and the looting and be focused on the police killing instead. It seems really fucking disingenuous to me when people don't say anything about, and I've seen plenty of people do this on my Facebook timeline, in my Discord, plenty of people, right? It seems really disingenuous to me when you don't talk about race relations in America whatsoever. You have very libertarian takes, very middle of the road, on the fence, kind of whatever. You don't there's no the law isn't racist. There's nothing written into law about being racist. And when you have those kind of takes, when you don't recognize the systematic oppression in America, and then when this starts happening, you say something along the lines of, well, the cop killing was bad, but they shouldn't be rioting and looting. I think it's really bad. And when you only talk about the violence of the rioters, the violence of the looters, when there's just as much violence coming from the police, it just feels really fucking disingenuous to me. And it doesn't feel like you've either thought out your take, either that or you're being willfully ignorant, right? The core takeaway I want from this stream is that takeaway I want from the stream is that to focus on the rioters is to completely miss the issue. The reason they're rioting is the most important part of all of this, without a shadow of a doubt, right? Have you mentioned riots and looting being started by plainclothed? Oh, yeah, so I don't like engaging in anything like that because I'm going to get onto conspiracy theories in a bit, and I'm going to call it conspiracy theory for now because we just don't know. I have seen some very weird footage that may suggest that there are false flags. I'm not going to deny that. There is definitely some strange shit. But I'm going to get onto all of that in a sec, and I also don't like to engage in that kind of stuff. I like to talk about stuff we know about, right? I don't like speculating, especially when it comes to something like this, right? But I'll get onto that in a sec. But yeah, the core takeaway I want from this is that rioting and looting happens when certain social conditions are met. Happy people don't riot. It's as simple as that. This is just evidence throughout society. You're never ever going to see like a bunch of people who are mostly content in life. One thing goes a bit wrong and then suddenly there's like fucking fires in the streets. It's just not a thing that happens, right? So that's pretty much everything. Ultimately, I would say I support the rioters. I think rioting and looting isn't the best optically, but at this point, I really can't blame them for their actions, right? So let's talk about. So I'll get onto the conspiracy thing now. Actually, I'm pretty much following like a Word doc. So let's get on to the conspiracy theory stuff. So generally speaking, after a big event like this, I like to go to the places that would most hardcore defend the police, so I can understand exactly what they have to say about it, what the kind of arguments I'm going to hear rolled out for however long over the whole thing's, done, so I can think about it and kind of form my own opinion on it, right? So after a big event like this, I typically visit Poll, which is the politics place in 4chan, right? I wouldn't recommend anyone going there. It's a trash tier place, but I went over there because I was curious to see what they were saying. And normally, first things first, they would be blaming the person who got shot as opposed to the police officer because there's no footage. In this case, literally no one is doing that. Everyone, even in Poll, can see how fucked up this killing was, and nobody is denying that. Even the most racist, most bigoted people you could possibly find on the internet aren't claiming that this was like a police officer shooting in self-defense or anything along those lines. That just isn't a thing that's happening. But there is something that is a little worrying, I think, that's sparked up, and that's the conspiracy theories. So the first one I saw, which I found really interesting, is that the person who was killed wasn't actually Mark Floyd, because the pictures, because the video, they were basically claiming that the video was doctored and it isn't a real video and no one was actually killed. Don't really know why you would believe that. The evidence for it is very fucking shaky. It's all to do with like looking at, what did I say, sorry? Wait, why are you typing George Mark Duggan? Wait, what? You said Mark. Oh shit, sorry, my bad. Oh, my bad. Sorry, I meant, yeah, sorry. George, yeah, people are claiming that George Floyd wasn't actually killed and the video was doctored, and they're comparing, footage of the footage of the killing to pictures of George Floyd and stuff like that. Obviously, all of this shit's absurd. If you really want to go look into it, you can, but all of the evidence I've seen for it is incredibly like shit and shaky. And the point is that I don't think that anyone would be I just don't understand what the motivation to do something like that is and who would do that, right? It just doesn't really make all that much sense. Secondly, the second thing I've seen is that so that's the conspiracy theory from the right wing. I've also seen conspiracy theories on the left wing. On my Facebook wall, I've seen people claiming that if you look at the facial structure of the police officer that did the killing, his facial structure in the video is different to the person that they convicted. It seems really absurd to me. I don't see how, as a layman, you could try and look at something like that and try and make genuine sort of comparisons. There's a ton we know about the differences between different types of lenses on cameras and that kind of thing. It can genuinely distort facial structure and things like that. It's not uncommon to get two videos of the same event and they look different because the lenses are super different. I would almost guarantee all this stuff can be explained. So please, for anyone who's talking about conspiracy shit, just drop it. It's really dumb. The fact of the matter is, George Floyd was killed by a police officer, and that's all there is to it, right? But the more insidious conspiracy theory has obviously come from the right wing. And like I said earlier, it seems in general that people on poll will try and find any justification for events like this. They'll try and shift the blame away from the police officers. And it's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my life. Like, genuinely, it's really fucked up. And one of my favourite people to point to for this is a guy called Nick Fuentes, which I'm sure some of you will be aware of. That's this fellow over here. So, this is the main one I'm seeing being pushed at the minute. George Floyd died of a heart attack while on fentanyl and has also recently taken meth, real winner. So the implication here, regardless of whether or not this person believes it, I think that a very, very, very easy way to read this is to say that George Floyd was not killed by the police officer. This is 100% implying that he died of a heart attack. Well, he just outright says it. He died of a heart attack according to an autopsy. That's what this person is saying. But the underlying implication is that the person would have died whether the police officer took their actions or not. That's what the implication here is. Regardless of what you actually think about the autopsy, to believe that the police officer's actions had no kind of weighing on whether this person died or not, I think is one of the most absurd things I've seen. Plus, second thing to consider, there are two autopsies. There's the official one, and then there's a private one that the family paid for, from what I understand. One of them found that he had some underlying condition and it was exacerbated. Second one is that he died of asphyxiation. Now, personally, I think when a person's on the ground and they've got a knee to the back of their neck and their neck is clearly strained on the floor, I think it's pretty clear to me that the asphyxiation is, if not definitely true, very, very likely. It just lines up perfectly with the event that happened. And secondly, even if you don't think that that was how he died, even if you think it was of a heart attack and there were some underlying conditions, you would have to take the opinion that they were so bad he would have died anyway to not blame the police officer. Simply put, you would have to take the position that the police officer did nothing wrong because regardless of his actions, this person would have died. The point is that this doesn't detract from the fact that there is systematic oppression in America, and doesn't take away from the fact that a police officer knelt on the neck of a black man until the point at which he died. And the only way this would ever justify anything is if you believe that George would have just died randomly, just his heart would have fucking exploded or whatever while he was walking down the street and this had never happened and he would be dead regardless. That's the only way that this would be a reasonable thing to say in this circumstance. And even if you believe that, even if you want to take that completely absurd position, even if you want to go that fucking far with it, it still doesn't excuse the level of police brutality exerted in that video. Even if George didn't die, even if he just passed out and was took on an ambulance, I think that it's very clear to anyone that this police officer is kind of a piece of shit. This police officer was on some mad power trip or something like that and was gross misconduct. That is still... Oh, sorry, I just punched Mike. That is still just undeniable from the video alone. You can just clearly see this is a total abuse of police power. There's absolutely no denying that, right? So that's, I think, pretty much everything I wanted to say about the conspiracy theories. They're a little bit fucking crazy. But you can take a look. I've got a couple other links open. I can't... Well, this was just general rioting or whatever. This was in regards to the autopsy. So you can see this is the private post-mortem finding the asphyxia. This is another one claiming it was homicide, but that again takes the independent autopsy. There's still two autopsies, but this one seems to be the one that's referenced the most from what I can see. I don't know if we'll ever know which is true, but regardless, like I said, I very much personally believe that regardless of which autopsy is correct or which autopsy is more correct or whatever, he wouldn't have died if the police officer didn't stand on his neck. I think it's as simple as that, right? Why did I have this link open? This is the link that Nick Fuentes referenced in regards to the autopsy. And yeah, I read through it. It pretty much states what I stated already, that there's two autopsies and whatnot. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to say. I think this is disgusting. this is some of the most fucked up, like this is pretty much the most fucked up thing you can say. Again, to summarize real quick, riots don't happen unless people are unhappy. Simple as that. I stand with the rioters. I think that if your people are being executed in the streets and have been systematically oppressed for years and years and years, I think that I don't think I would do any better than go out and riot. I think I would be pretty fucking angry and probably go out and, start attacking some police stations or something. Or even if not that, I would definitely be protesting in the street, right? It just makes sense. I don't think there's any denying it. I don't think there's any way to say that, put it this way. I think it's really misguided, as I said earlier, to focus on the riots as opposed to the police killing. The riots wouldn't be happening if there was no police killing. The looters wouldn't be looting if they were happy people, if they were content with their lives. It just wouldn't be a thing that's happening. So yeah. Do you know what? The one thing I would like to come out of this, I really, really hope that the police body cameras are widespread in use after this, and I really, really hope that something gets written into law so that they have to be released to the public if the videos exist. It still doesn't stop certain problems. Like, I know people have had problems with I would hope that... Sorry, what am I trying to say? The one problem with that is obviously people turning off their police cameras. That's a thing that happens.